Every morning, Paul climbed into his yellow school bus before dawn. For 20 years, he'd driven the same route through the sleepy neighborhoods of Fairview, watching kids grow up from kindergartners to high schoolers. He loved his job, not because of the engine or the quiet roads before sunrise, but because he got to keep an eye on the kids, even if just for a short while each day. But something changed the moment Emma stepped onto the bus. Every day, she cried softly in the same seat. Every day she said nothing. And then one afternoon after she stepped off, Paul finally looked under the seat, and what he found sent shivers down his spine. Before we continue, please consider subscribing if you enjoy emotional stories. Like this, and let us know in the comments what country you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Emma was 8 years old and barely spoke. She boarded the bus every morning at 6:47 a.m., sharp, rain or shine, always in the same pink hoodie with a unicorn patch stitched over the heart. Her blonde hair was tangled most mornings, and her eyes were always red. But not from sleep, from crying. Paul noticed her from day one that fall. While other kids laughed and chattered, Emma sat in silence, staring out the window with tears in her eyes. She never had a backpack, just a small cloth bag that she clutched tightly to her chest. She didn't talk to other students. She didn't smile. She never met anyone's gaze. Paul had driven hundreds of kids in his time, and he'd seen it all. Teasing, meltdowns, shy new kids. But this was different. This was deeper. By the third week, Paul couldn't ignore the pattern. Every single morning, Emma cried. Sometimes she wiped the tears before others could see. Sometimes she sat still, expression blank with a streak down her cheek. But the crying wasn't what haunted Paul most. It was how silent she was about it. As if she'd been trained not to speak. As if making a sound would cost her something. He mentioned her quietness casually to a teacher during afternoon pickup. "She's just shy," the teacher said, already distracted. "Maybe new at school." But Paul knew better. He started paying closer attention. Watching Emma in the bus mirror. Noting every flinch, every glance over her shoulder. She wasn't just sad, she was scared. Emma always sat in seat 4B, a two-seater on the left side, third row from the front. She never changed it, no matter what. One morning, Paul gently said, "Hey there, Emma, you doing okay today?" She nodded once but didn't speak. Her fingers twisted the fraying end of her bag strap. He watched her in the mirror the whole ride. At one point he saw her glance under the seat, then quickly look away. The next day he saw her doing it again. A short glance down, under the seat, as if checking on something, or hiding something. And that was when the hairs on Paul's neck stood up. On Friday, Emma got off the bus like always. Paul waited until all the kids had cleared out, then pulled the bus into the depot. Normally he'd clean up wrappers, check under seats for left-behind lunchboxes, but today he headed straight to seat 4B. He knelt, heart pounding, and looked underneath. At first, he saw nothing. Then, tucked between the seat rails and wedged tightly into the metal frame, he saw a crumpled paper barely visible. He carefully pulled it out. It was a handwritten note in shaky, uneven letters, probably from a child. "If someone finds this, please help me. I don't feel safe. My mom's boyfriend hurts me at night and says if I tell, he'll hurt my little brother too. Please don't tell him I told you. My name is Emma." Paul's hands trembled as he read the words again and again, until the ink started to blur from the sweat on his palms. Paul didn't wait. He drove straight to the school and demanded to speak to the principal. He showed the note, explained Emma's behavior, her tears, the silence, the seat, the fear. The principal brought in the school counselor. CPS was called. And just like that, the storm was set in motion. Emma was gently pulled from class, interviewed, protected. And when authorities confronted her mother, the truth spilled out in horrifying detail. Emma and her younger brother had been suffering in silence for over a year. The boyfriend had threatened them repeatedly. Their mother, overwhelmed and terrified herself, had done nothing. That note was the first cry for help anyone had ever heard. Emma and her brother were placed into protective custody. Paul wasn't told all the details, but a social worker later told him privately, "That note may have saved both their lives." The boyfriend was arrested. Her mother entered a program. Emma slowly began to smile again. Weeks later, Paul received a small envelope, sealed in blue crayon wax. Inside was a drawing. Him standing beside the yellow school bus with a small girl holding his hand. There was one line written in a child's hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Paul didn't stop driving the bus, but from that day on he drove differently. He greeted every child by name. He memorized their faces, their moods. He watched for tears, for bruises, for silence. He trained himself not just to drive, but to notice. Emma's story spread quietly around town, but Paul never told it himself. It wasn't his to share. All he did was hang that drawing above the bus dashboard. And every morning when the engine rumbled to life, he looked at it and remembered, sometimes the smallest act of attention can become the greatest act of rescue. Why? Never know what someone is hiding under their silence. It could be fear. It could be pain. It could be a secret they're too scared to share. But a single kind word, a gentle question, a second glance under a bus seat, it can make all the difference in the world. So pay attention, because sometimes being the person who sees someone is what saves them. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring more powerful stories to you.